But now looking at 2025, my expectations are to see Lakeflow come out and hopefully do a very good job for pipeline building. Because, like I said, I've shared before my feedback on DLTs, and looking into 25, I'm I'm on the moderately optimistic side that it will be a much better improvement than DLTs were. So I'm curious in 2025, what are you looking forward to the most that you can talk about?
That's important that you said what I can talk about.
Well, you can talk about, yeah.
Looking into 2025, Lakeflow Connect is something a lot of people are really looking forward to. I would say that it's probably the single most requested thing that we get asked for like when we talk to people. Um, the vision of Lakeflow that Bilal put together at Summit, a lot of people agree that they like that um, experience. Being able to author with a GUI and generative AI at the same time, I think is ideal. Um, I'm constantly giving those teams feedback on what customers are saying about the usability of Delta Live tables and its ability to cohesively integrate with the rest of the platform. And I think we're making large strides into bridging those gaps. Um, Lakeflow is going to be a pretty interesting product. I've been asking for GUI based ETL pipelines since I came to this company. I mean, like I grew up in SSIS and Informatica. For me, like that, it seemed like a no brainer. I don't know if you know this, but maybe the audience does. Like I've like talked about Prophecy. I think that they're a great company. I did my claim to fame there is I talked. I was on the webinar with um, Prophecy and the Texas Rangers at the beginning of the season when they were talking about Databricks and Prophecy. So they're like the one team I followed in the World Series, and I thought it was fantastic. I think it's a great tool. So I think that the space that Lakeflow wants to get into, I mean, customers have been asking about it for a really long time. The thing that I am looking for, obviously, the SQL warehouse is my personal like focus area, where I've been focusing the most. Um, Something that we've been asking for a very long time is like warehouse parity with functionality in like the programmatic extensions to SQL, like scripting and store procedures. That stuff will finally land in Databricks SQL Warehouse in 25. I think that's super duper exciting. Uh, my question to like the customers internally is the dichotomy of um, the world of stored procedures. You can think of it as uh, procedural, imperative, stateful data processing. You tell it where you left off, where it has to get the new data from, how to take that data and put it where you want it to go, and then stash somewhere that this is where I left off last time. So the next time this thing batch processes, it'll pick up where it left off and do it again. That's a stateful processing. Right? I have to pick up where I left off and process it again, and I have to do it in a chunk. We call it batch processing in the data warehousing world. But then in like the data engineering world, they want to focus more on stateless processing, where you do and declarative. So like Delta Live tables, or even I would say the ultimate vision of pipelines is you don't have to manage state. You don't have to be super specific and imperative programming in a procedural way. You just say, I express to you the expressions of how my data should look in its final state. And then the pipeline with all of my with all of my declaratives dependent statements, it should be able to go back upstream, figure out how to pull that data through. And you don't have to tell it like where I left off last time, where do I need to pick up this time, and how do I process all this logic that I need to get through. Like that vision is fantastic. But like trying to get people who've programmed in store procedures for 30 years, 20, 30 years, to get to this like new world of like, no, you don't have to manage your own state. You don't, it just give me the expression of how you express the end state and I'll figure out how to do it. That is a big mind shift.
Yeah.
For people. That's really hard to grok after you've done things one way like your whole career, right? So I think that how we cross that chasm for me is going to be very interesting. And looking into 2025, like how do we bridge the gap between like classic, and I was actually, I read blogs like every morning and sometimes I share them on LinkedIn. One of the blogs I read through, I didn't like where the author was from. I didn't end up sharing this one, but they were talking about like what is ETL and what is data engineering. And these are like different things, right? Data engineering is like processing data on any type of data that you would see into some type of pipeline. ETL is how do I get this data to fit in my warehouse? Fusing these two worlds together in a cohesive pipeline that work together, it's going to be the hardest thing that we accomplish in 25. I don't know how we're going to do it, to be honest. Even I have like hallucinations of how we can thread the needle. And I'm convincing some people sometimes of these crazy ideas. But like, I think that's the hardest thing we tackle, if not next year, the next couple of years, is how do we shift the market from being super pedantic about how they express their pipelines to being more solution focused and more on like the end state. How is this stuff, how should it end up? How do you express it? And then, hey, we'll worry about all of the gobbledygook to get it there. I think that's going to be one of the biggest shifts that we worked through in 25. How these products and services fit in to like make that shift happen. I think that's the biggest thing. I think AI completely disrupted the machine learning space. I think the prime area for disruption right now is this dichotomy between data engineering, ETL, stateful, stateless processing, like how we bring that world into the future. I think is going to be something that we struggle through in 25. And maybe we don't solve it till 26, 27. But I think that's the biggest thing we start tackling next year. What do you think?
Do you think this is perhaps? I know you've talked about SQL Mesh quite a bit, or at least mentioned it a few times, and I haven't gotten to dive into it. Do you think this is a place where SQL Mesh plays into it potentially?
Oh God, I don't know like how much of the stuff I could share and whatnot, but like what I say now is my hallucination. No one. This is not like how Databricks thinks. I gotta tell you, like so this is just me. Okay, I gotta pre-say that like this is not something that Databricks thinks. This is just Franco's crazy thoughts. Okay. If I had a magic wand, right? What I really like about SQL Mesh is that if you do full loads of your pipelines, and for some odd reason, and we all know that there's reasons why you can't get incrementals from your source. There's a laundry list of reasons why you can't. I'm not going to iterate on them, but there are reasons why as a data engineer, you're stuck with full loads, right? And you have to do dbt run on the pipeline or whatever. You have to express the whole pipeline at once, and you have to persist out full loads like every time. And the thing with dbt that I don't think a lot of people grok is that every time you do dbt run, or any other system for that matter, it's not just dbt, anytime you have dependent CTASs, create or replace tables that persist in a pipeline in the cloud, and you do it like that, it persists a new version every time. And with cloud object stores, especially with how Delta works, it persists that version and it keeps it in storage every time. So your storage costs actually end up like ballooning, and you have to maintain that. So then people are like, well, can I just vacuum it? Sure, that's another step, right? And I always say like dbt was built for Snowflake, and in Snowflake it's by default only 7 days of time travel, And the way that the previous table versions are kept is a little bit different. The way the storage costs are done, it's more of like a data warehouse, like an on-prem data warehouse. Whereas like the way that Iceberg and Delta were built with time travel, it keeps all those table versions in the same directory. So you're paying the same storage cost for all dev test prod for every time you run a pipeline for up to 30 days. And it's just that storage is pretty intensive, right? Now, could you maintain that and reduce it and manage it? Yes, it's all manual. So that's like a big thing that worries me. The other one is
In a much more niche, like there's different levels of knowledge and understanding from engineers, right? And like kind of to your point earlier, for making Databricks more accessible, or even for the Snowflake folks making it more accessible to their platform, you're adding more and more and more layers. Like, okay, now I got to vacuum. Like, now I got to do this.
Yep. And I'm like, well, can't we just not persist a new version in the first place? Like one of my greatest examples is from going on-prem to the cloud is the one of the very common practices is to do kill and fill on-prem. You truncate the table, you reload the table. When you're dealing with a database on-prem, that's fine. Who cares? When you do it in the cloud with eventual consistency, killing the table and then filling it doesn't always actually execute an order. And actually, there were things we had to build in Delta to make sure that the truncate stopped before the insert started, because the commands could be executing while we're still waiting for cloud storage to update, right? So there's all these very complex. So that's like one big problem area space, is like persisting out storage for versions and managing all that complexity. The other big one is, how are we going to take all of these customer workloads that are store procedural logic with stateful processing? How are we going to bring those into the new stateless paradigm? Right? So like, how are you going to basically, are you going to have consultants convert all the code? Are we going to have AI do it? Does AI know how to do it? Is it going to be foolproof? Really what you need is something that can parse all the SQL, build a DAG, take the DAG representation, and represent it a different way as a pipeline. What's SQL glot? It parses a SQL statement, develops the abstract syntax tree, and then convert it to a different language. If you just higher order this thing into a procedure with a pipeline, which takes a little bit of engineering work, a little bit of extras, but then if you convert that, it'll actually able to express the DAG in any which way that you want, right? With a little extra work. It does not work like this today.
It's not quite like the magic wand, like just happens just like that.
No, nothing will happen just like that. But at least this thing can take a representation of SQL and change it. But it maintains the spirit of what it was doing. It's kind of like an easy way to explain it. So on both of those fronts, SQL Mesh does not persist every copy of the data. So what it does is, because it has SQL glot, it has something interesting called model fingerprinting, where it understands the model and its pipeline, and it's actually able to fingerprint a specific version of this model. And it has something called virtual data environments, where the data environments are more like views. The actual tables is a different persistence layer. You're not persisting out tables. You're actually persisting out views. SQL Mesh deals with where that's pointed to the tables underneath the covers. So actually, when you move to dev test prod, or if you implement a pipeline, it will only incrementally grab the new data from upstream, put it into the data files, and then it will not copy out new persistence. So when we're talking about super efficient, right? And if you full load, so let's just say you're one of those companies, and I know a lot of financial companies that are stuck with full loads. They can't incrementalize for some odd reason, there's one way or another. They would love to do this. Why wouldn't you want something that just doesn't persist out extra copies of your data for no reason? Please shut up and take my money. Of course I'd want to do that. And plus, you can suck up any DBT project and convert it to SQL Mesh. I think it's novel. Is it perfect? It's not perfect. But do I think they've got some good ideas? Yes, I think their ideas are really good. What would I do? Magic wand. Same thing we did with DBT is we put DLT materializations into DBT. So you could say materialize this as a streaming table and it would be a DLT streaming table, or materialize this as a materialized view and it would persist out as a DLT underneath the covers. But you express the SQL logic just like any other DBT or SQL mesher. Like you're just expressing out your analytics in that form. And then underneath the covers, DLT is actually incrementalizing on your behalf. And then we could also fuse SQL Mesh to not write out extra copies of the data. So if I had my way, I would fix the kind of the full load storage problem. That how do I convert all of these things that from stored procedures into stateless processing? I'm not saying DLT will win. I'm not sticking my thumb on DLT, even though I do think it will win. I'm saying you could take these things and represent them into a stateless DAG, which DLT is one of these options. If you could combine those three and thread that needle, where you'd have super simple migrations from stored procedures into the stateless pipeline, you weren't copying out duplicate copies of the data all the time. And then you have SQL Mesh's ability to do CI/CD, which is super great, I think, in my perspective. I think we would be able to fire on all cylinders when we're trying to solve this really complicated problem of how do you cross that chasm of bringing these tools, these stateless processing to the masses. We're not going to train up a bunch of data engineers on how to write, or data warehousing people on how to write stateless pipelines and have them convert it manually. I do not think that that's what the market is going to do. I don't think AI alone can do it. I actually think it's going to be a combination of, and I actually have some essays at Databricks that are doing this today. They're a combination of using SQLGlot plus AI. Wherever SQLGlot can't figure it out, AI figures it out for them. And I think that will help to solve this migration problem. And moving forward, we're going to teach new people how to just express or ask what they want from the AI. The AI will understand how to actually create the pipelines in the way that it's supposed to be created. I think engineers are going to be using natural language more and spot checking. They're going to confirm the logic is supposed to be doing what it's doing, validate that through checkouts. So that's some of Franco's crazy ideas. Again, none of this is real life for Databricks. All of this was pure speculation on my end, something that I just think about in my head. I talked to some people. A lot of people disagree with me, by the way. There are people that disagree with that sentiment, and it could end up not happening. But I'm just that. If I had my magic wand, that's what I would do.
If you were doing it, this is probably the way that you would go about it.
Yeah, if I had to solve, like when I look at problems, I try to stack them up and try to kill 2, 3 birds at one stone, right? If I have the opportunity to tackle down two of the hardest problems we have in the data engineering and ETL space today with one fell swoop, I want to try to thread that needle.